Awesome. Cool. You can start recording anytime. Okay, cool. Hello, everybody. I'm Grace, and today I will be doing a talk about intro to design thinking and then UI UX design, and talking about the different things we do in industry and UX design. And throughout my presentation, I'll be looking at the chat for any questions, and I'll be leaving some room for questions at the end, and also going through a demo of Figma and how UI UX designers work in industry, and also interacting with the chat and answering any questions that come up along the way. And so for the presentation, I'll be going over like an intro about what design is and what design thinking is, and like kind of like the process companies and basically even like all the stakeholders of our project do to solve problems. And then later I'll be going more in depth into UX design, which is user experience design, the bridge between the user and the product, and then user interface design. To kind of, and then I'll end it with a Figma demo and just show you guys around what tools and technologies and strategies UI UX designers use in industry. And so right now I'm a UX design intern at Electronic Arts for summer and fall. I also founded and lead the design of Design Buddies, which is a large design community on Discord. I started back in April. We're almost at 10,000 members, which is super exciting. I'm also a computer science and engineering student from Santa Clara University in California. I was born and raised in this SF Bay area, been here all my life. And I have a lot of side hustles. I have my own art business where I table at anime conventions and do a lot of social media and blogging. That picture is actually me at Crunchyroll Expo in 2019 with Arilla Kuma, one of my favorite characters. And yeah, just my website, graceling.com. And so, oops, let me skip. Feel free to like let me know like what you think design is in the chat. And yeah. And so design essentially is like, it's a process. It's a process to solve a problem. It's different than art. So art, it's like expressing people. People can express themselves. Design is you make things that people use and solves a problem. So that's how design differs from art. It's a problem solving process, often iterative, and you do a lot of testing to validate your designs to making sure you're designing the right thing to solve the problem. And the goal is to create user experiences for people that solve problems or to fulfill a need or to fill a user need or a business goal. So that's how it differs from art. And so oftentimes when you think of design thinking, you think of these 5 different steps where you first empathize, meaning you understand the problem, doing a lot of interviews, understanding the stakeholders. And after you gather all these information, you narrow down to one problem you want to solve from your data, you define it, and then later you kind of expand even more, you ideate different solutions to your problem. And then later you pick one or you pick multiple from your all of your ideas for your brainstorm session to prototype it and to test it and keep getting data to validate your design decisions, to making sure you're solving the right problem, because design at the end of the day is always solving a problem based on a user need or a business goal. Oh, cool. Nice to meet you, Norman. And yeah, feel free to let me know like what problems you face every day in design, or just problems you face, because design's all about solving problems. I personally feel like, I don't know, like I generally am pretty positive, but I feel like these days, like since everything's online, like connecting with people online is another design challenge and everything too. So yeah, so I guess some current design challenges. Yeah, design can be hard. So sometimes like there's like so many things you could do. And just like there's so many areas to explore. So it's definitely narrowing down to like what problem I'm trying to solve is also another challenge itself. And so currently just examples, these are just like COVID examples. Definitely there's a lot of people getting the virus. So healthcare system exhaustion, how do we get doctors to match patients, and how do we get patients the help they need while balancing the other patients with COVID and non-COVID. And just like working remotely, ways to collaborate remotely, and ways to attend classes remotely, it's another challenge. A lot of small businesses are closed still to support them, and or losing businesses just because everything is on lockdown, at least in my area. So these are some examples that can be solved with design or products. And so a big question people typically ask is, what is UX versus UI design? And I like to think of it as like human body analogy. So UX is kind of like the skeleton, the user flow and how things work in a high level, and UI is the skin and how things look like. So it's like the paint. So it's like a car, and then like UI is the paint and how things look like, the overall brand identity, colors, themes, and everything that kind of relates to the brand. And UX is the experience of it. Later I'll be going more in depth into UX versus UI design. And so design thinking is kind of like the overarching theme, like the underlying principle behind both UX and UI design. And so again, these like 5 steps are the underlying principles of design thinking, but in reality, it's a lot more complex than this. It involves a lot of just like testing things out, exploring, going back and keep learning and keep iterating upon that. So definitely want to like empathize. And after sometimes like when you prototype, you find like after you test it, you find some issue that you're missing something. So you find that your problem statement is maybe invalidated. So you want to do some more exploration. So you head back to this place. Sometimes when you launch products, you end up like seeing how customers and how stakeholders behave, and you realize that the problem you're solving might not actually be it might actually be different than a problem they're actually facing. So you want to go back and like kind of brainstorm and kind of restart, or kind of just like learn every step and keep iterating upon the way as well. So it's a cycle, it never really ends. You can keep improving design. So oftentimes people use metrics to validate things, keep improving products. So you usually like don't really see, you can always keep improving. There's always ways to improve. And design thinking is really just like a process instead of just like a linear approach. And so the example I'll be going through while I'm like explaining how design thinking works is the first case study I actually did for our design portfolio. I did this about a year ago. I looked into Discord. It was for like a intro to product design class, but I looked into Discord and found a pain point, and did some research and some market and user research and found the problem I was trying to solve. And later I'll show the steps of how I came up with a solution to bookmark messages based on the problem I found of keeping track of too many messages. And I'll be going more in depth into this soon. So yeah, the first step is you want to empathize. So you really want to understand the problem being solved. Like, why is this a problem? Like, what does the user need? And oftentimes you'll consult a lot of experts in this field. Let's say like you want to solve something for the healthcare system. You want to consult like medical experts. So a lot of stakeholders come into play in this. You also want to define your business goals as well, and also do a lot of like user and market research to see what solutions are already out there, so you're not repeating the same thing. So there's a lot of research that goes on in this phase as well, just gathering information, learning as much as you can. And you want to ask a lot of questions like the who, what, when, where, why, and like just making sure that what you're trying to solve is a real problem, just by consulting experts and just like trying to balance business goals, user goals, and making sure the clear goals are defined. So people are not getting like making sure the product is actually heading to the right direction. And so you want to gather data to like validate your problem. And this also helps you validate it, but also convinces stakeholders like leadership roles in companies, or just like or like even investors to invest in your product once you back everything by data. So you definitely want to do a lot of user interviews and surveys to interview stakeholders, review existing products, making sure the business goals are aligned, but also the technical limitations. So design is such an interdisciplinary field. You have to understand the users, a bit of psychology, some business knowledge, to making sure that everything you design is geared towards a business goal, and also some technical knowledge, so making sure that this idea is actually technically feasible. So it's a balancing act of everything, and you want to make sure you have all these in line before you start implementing anything. So making sure that you're solving the right problem, but it's actually possible to, and actually like makes sense, and it's possible to make the right product. And usually sometimes personas is a way to people to synthesize data, because when you're doing a lot of user research interviews, you run into a lot of people, and personas is like a fictional character that helps you kind of frame your designs based on that person. So personas is kind of like the average of all the people you've surveyed, to help you identify the different expectations of people and help you shape your product strategy to just have like a average of all the data you've encountered to make it easier for you to design. Um, and this easily kind of reflects the user patterns and just help you, like, it's like it kind of grounds you in all the research you've done. And this is an example of persona. It's like a fake person, and like the average of all the research you've found, like the average demographic, like how many kids they have, what's their education level, where their goals are, and yeah, the average of all the stakeholders. And just like you're thinking of this person, this fictional person, when you're designing for things. And second step is to define. After you gather all this data, you want to choose, there could be like multiple avenues you could be choosing. So usually you want to have a goal. So you want to define one problem, the outcomes using a problem statement, just put together all these information from empathize stage, and just really define a central problem statement, like kind of like the thesis or mission statement you're trying to solve. And so going back to my Discord example, Discord is a huge chat app used by a lot of people, and people have problems keeping up with messages because there's no bookmarking system. So people can, like, chats are linear. So there's no like bookmarking tool. There's no like threads or anything. So it's easy for things to get lost. So that was, people like had issues with that because they were missed major updates. And so this is some like user research interview questions, some examples of questions I actually asked users, the who, what, when, where, why, and like kind of understanding what features they think is important, asking them to rank what's the most important to least important, to really understand what they're thinking of and what they prioritize, to making sure that we're solving the right problem for the user. Because design's all about solving problems for other people, not just yourself. So it's important to do these interviews to understand the other person and what they're facing, because that's ultimately what drives the company more revenue, to get more customers. Instead of just satisfying one person, it's going to satisfy as many people as possible to drive the company up more revenue. And so when you think of empathizing and defining, you always also want to think of, oh, how would I measure success of this design or this problem statement being solved? And use this by using metrics. And these metrics are data points. These can be both qualitative or quantitative data. You want to have a balance of both, such as user satisfaction, how satisfied are the users with this product, and how easy it is for the users to complete a task, whether they can complete it, whether they can understand your product, and how fast, how much the user stays on, and how much they recommend it with their friends. So they're just really important, just to keep in mind at all steps. You don't want to like think about this at the end. It's important to think about how would you measure success from the beginning, because this ultimately shapes how you would use to measure success, so you can convince stakeholders and investors to invest in your product. And in the company leadership positions too, and other engineers or product managers to invest in your idea. And so this is another example that people typically use in explaining design thinking. It's called the double diamond. Usually this is sort of the empathize phase. You're doing a lot of research on the problem, and then later this is the define phase, when you're narrowing down to the problem you're solving, and next we're heading to the idea phase. So once you have that central problem statement, you're asking like, how might we solve this? And just like thinking of a lot of like how might we questions, and like kind of amplify your ideas, and just like think of, and then later like you want to converge again and just like define like which ideas you want to be solving, kind of going over that and making sure that it's a lot of convergent and divergent thinking, just like it's like having up with a lot of ideas and later deciding which one is the ideal or the best one, and then coming up with all ideas to solve that again, and then coming up with the best one. So you want to explore as many solutions as possible. And so now we're heading to the ideate phase. So we're like diverging again. And yeah, so this is just asking a bunch of like, how might we questions, like, oh, how might we making sure that hospitals are getting the right patients? Or how might we like make it easier for users and Discord to find messages? Or how might we make it make it easier for users to like recap messages? Or how might we implement a bot to make it to automate things? So just asking, like, this is like we just do some blue sky thinking, just think of like all the possible solutions. Definitely do a lot of group. So it's easy. So usually typically the empathize and like this phase is typically done in a group setting because design's super collaborative, and oftentimes you'll like have different ideas in people. It's good to like bounce back and forth to making sure that all the like pain points and all the areas are being touched on, to kind of expand the problem space as well. And later, after you thought of all these things, you will pick a few to test. And this is a phase where you see a lot of designers like the stock photos, they see a lot of sticky notes. So this is what they're doing. They're like ideating, and this is like what the sticky notes mean when you see in stock photos everywhere. So after that, sometimes you'll do something called affinity mapping, where you have all these sticky notes of ideas and you kind of group them together based on what the similar ones are. And it kind of narrow down which idea you want to choose. And later on, you'll pick a few to test and prototype and to like validate it with metrics. And again, this is like kind of heading to this phase. And now we're heading to the prototype phase, which is the experimental phase. So you're like a scientist here, kind of like coming up with hypotheses and validating that. So this is when you investigate solutions based on the ideas you generated from the ideate phase. And the goal is just to find the best solutions. And so prototypes basically are like versions of the end product. It's like usually it's not before it hands up to developer, but it's just kind of like a mock-up or like the fake version of the real version of the product that people use to test out to the users. And the goal is to find out like constraints, like how users behave, whether your design actually meets the needs, and whether users can understand your designs and be able to run through different tasks without guidance. And just to see how users just like react and feel and behave, and just making sure that you're solving the right problem. And you usually do this with, sometimes you start off with like low fidelity designs just to get feedback, because as a designer, you want to get feedback as much as possible to making sure you're solving the right problems, because design's all about solving problems. So like usually people just do sketches or wireframes to lay out the overall user flow of things and the hierarchy of content, and for users to go over. And these are some examples. So this is a low fidelity. This is a little more detailed than normal, but essentially I just sketched out how my solution looked like. So Discord, I have like the bookmark thing. People can like, using Discord's existing features, I just added a little bookmarking feature, so users are already familiar with this pattern, and kind of designed like, oh, this place is where bookmarks would be, and this is how like people would access bookmarks and stuff to communicate my ideas. And now we're kind of heading into the UI design. So, and when prototyping, this is like the prototype, we think about the user interface as well. So I just like made this on Figma, rebuilt Discord in Figma, and just had users test on it. And this is a prototype, so this is no code, is how it actually looks like. So I'm bookmarking it, choosing a category. This is just like the idea I came up with for this problem statement. And then, yeah, I'm just showing, so you can bookmark it, you can access bookmarks. I add a little thing there. It can like scroll through and see which bookmarks, and seeing the messages you bookmarked. Yeah, so this is the feature I made from Discord based on that problem statement, going through the design thinking process. And so for prototyping, there's all different tools you can use. The most industry standard one is Figma, just because it's like really collaborative and really easy to learn. But once it's like kind of like programming languages, once you learn one, it's pretty easy to learn the other ones, like a XD, Sketch, and Envision. They both do really similar things in Figma. So as long as you just like pick one to master, it should be all good. And now after you finish your prototype, you want to test it to making sure that you're solving the right problem. So testing, meaning you're exploring your hypothesis. And oftentimes you want to be collecting both qualitative and quantitative data from the metrics you've determined from the beginning. And you'll do this by usability testing, to running the user through a certain amount of tasks and seeing if they can complete these tasks or not, and how satisfied they are with it. And this is just to refine your problem, just like get a deeper understanding. And also it drives the iterations of the product to keep improving along the way as well. And oftentimes people would do usability testing, meaning just like testing how easy for the product is used, running the user through a series of tasks to really define what they like, how satisfied they are and how confused they are or how understanding they are, and using this data to keep like iterating, keep improving the product. Yeah, and you usually collect these metrics as well when you're doing usability testing. These are just like metrics for this project, but it could be anything you could be measuring. And as a designer, it's also really, really important to think about accessibility all throughout the whole product cycle, because accessibility not only makes your product more inclusive, but also makes people's lives easier in general. Because when you solve for accessibility, you kind of solve for everybody to improve everybody's lives, but you also unlock another market. So you can reach even more customers. So it has both user needs, user goals, and business needs balanced. So this is why it's super important to take count in this, to making sure people with disabilities and like vision, hearing, movement can be able to use your product and understand it and benefit from that, make it more inclusive, and also like get more audiences. And usually, so accessibility meaning like designing things for example, like people are colorblind, making sure you don't use too many certain shades of green, and making sure text is not green, or making sure text has enough contrast. And for people who also might be visually impaired, they might be using screen readers. So as a developer, adding alt text, just like little things like that are really, really important. And the AAA, the double A's are kind of like what it's set by this organization called WCAG, and they have like a list of all these requirements, how much contrast and how much like how accessible, like just like guidelines on how to make your product more accessible. And these can include like typography hierarchy, like how different is the header from the body of text, and how people can differentiate things, and enough visual contrast and consistent navigation so people don't get confused, helpful error states, clear focus states, and more. So these are just like guidelines. There's like whole articles, whole lists, and whole studies done on this, but it's also important to think about these things when you're designing, to making sure that you're including these other users, but also when you're including them, you benefit their experience as well, but you also benefit the business because you unlock a set of customers, and you also improve the experience for everybody. And now I'll talk a little bit about UX design and kind of the bridge between the user and a product and what a UX designer does. And so UX design is really similar to design thinking. Design thinking is kind of like the underlying principle of everything in design. So UX design is definitely like a balancing act. You want to balance the user needs, business goals, while considering the technical limitations and business constraints. Business constraints meaning deadlines, different stakeholders, different politics within company even. So it's a balancing act of everything. So as a UX designer, it's good to have knowledge of psychology, business, tech, and also like dealing and communication, and making sure that you're dealing with customers and like the business as well, and knowing their constraints. So not only you have to have visual skills, it's good to communication, teamwork, and just understanding is also a really key thing to designers. And so when you're developing a product, the first priority is you want to make it useful, so meaning it solves a problem. And next, you want to make it so people understand how it's being used. And later, you want to think about how beautiful it is and how it looks like, so people can have a better user experience. But this is just like a priority hierarchy. And so definitely this is the kind of the process really similar to design thinking, making sure you're solving the right problem and going through that iterative process and testing it, making sure what you're solving is the right problem. And so a lot of people actually do UX, and not only designers, but people like different professions. Like you can be a user researcher, meaning you're involved in like the Empathize space where you interview a lot of stakeholders and define the problem, but you're also involved in that user testing phase where you help out the designer to test out your problems and collect data and like determine what metrics you want to use to measure success. And then what I do as a UX designer, so I design a lot of user flows, wireframes, doing some UI design as well. And you can be a UI or UX engineer. They're both pretty similar. So this is kind of the bridge between design and engineering. So you basically building a design system based on like the components you use, sitemaps, and you collaborate between designers and engineers. And you have to have a lot of front end knowledge for this. And next, you can also be a content strategist. So this is kind of like the one that writes the copy, writes all the description, and writes all the content for the product as well. These are a lot of professions you can do to involve UX design. And so how to get started is how I started, how a lot of people start, is you want to first learn the fundamentals, which is what y'all are doing right now. And you want to practice it, because like people can just like learn forever, but the real learning comes from actually doing it and getting feedback along the way. So practicing what you've learned, practicing taking a problem to a solution and getting feedback and kind of iterating upon that and testing it with users and just practicing interacting people, but also design is really, really important. And so that's the most important thing. And then usually, and then now you want to improve in your design tools. There's so many tools you can use, but the underlying principle, being able to solve a problem, articulate your design decisions, is more important than how skilled you are with Figma. So definitely get the fundamentals down, get that problem solving down and that communication down. And then next you want to worry about, oh, how do I like make this animation? Because oftentimes like this, like mastering tools should not be your first priority, because there's lots of tutorials you can look up, but the main thing that hiring managers look for is how good you are actually like solving problem, communicating your design decisions. And next to look at how skillful you are, because oftentimes like different companies use different tools, so they'll train you to do this, but problem solving and communication, it's a bit harder to train. So it's better to like do this work early on, and just getting feedback. And oftentimes it's also good to get feedback on every single step of the process to making sure that you're solving the right problem and you're like learning design, you're not missing anything as well. So it helps a lot when you want to go into a new career to have a mentor to give you feedback along the way and guidance, because you don't know what you're missing. So it's good to have feedback in the mentor or anybody to help you out. And so what exactly does a UX designer do? So UX design is such an interdisciplinary field, kind of what I do. And I do a lot of strategy and content. So meaning like competitor analysis, user research, a lot of just like content strategy and business thinking to making sure I'm solving the right problem that actually drives the company more growth and solves and improves the lives of users. And doing all these things and making sure I'm validating the problem, the project to solve these goals. And then next, I want to do wireframing and prototyping. So meaning just like testing out my design, making sure it's actually solving the problem again, getting feedback from everything, and then kind of executing this and working with engineers, product managers, meeting product deadlines and implementation deadlines and tracking goals and just like analyzing the product and working with them to iterate upon that as well is also really, really important. So this is like kind of what a UX designer does on this job. It's really interdisciplinary, so it's good to have all these skills, being able to solve problems, communicate, and also visually lay out the experience of your product is really, really important. And so the overall is just balancing business goals and user needs, just going back to the fundamentals. And so now going to UI design, which is UI, UX design work really similarly with each other. UI design mostly focus on the user interface and the look and feel of the product. And UX design focuses on all the overall flow of the product, the user flow and the experience. And so UI design usually comes from UX design. Like after UX design, the product development, research, content, and everything's laid out, you start thinking about UI design, which is how attractive it is and how users can understand your product. So these two also work really closely with each other, but this is kind of like the main difference between both UX and UI design. Yeah, so the goal is just making sure you're visually guiding the users to navigate through the interface and you're solving the right problem. And making sure the experience is really intuitive for the users to understand and be able to benefit from. And so UI design includes a lot of things, usually like icons and buttons, how things look, how like what font you use for typography, how things are laid out on the page, what colors you use, making sure they have enough contrast, making sure they fit the overall brand theme. So having an imagery, like having images, illustrations that reflect the brand and overall problem trying to solve, spacing, making sure all the elements are spaced out so people can understand the hierarchy of action and hierarchy of content you're trying to display. And also responsive design, so making sure design scales. So making sure the website or the app is consistent within the web version or on a smaller screen like a mobile phone, making sure things don't break and things are consistent based on where the user is accessing the content from. And so UI is important because it retains more users, just to kind of improve the user experience, and also aligns their brand and developing trust within that brand. Having consistent UI so people can expect to see the expectations with that brand as well. So that's why UI design is important as well, just as important as UX. And so UI design typically comes a bit later in the process, later in the product process, when the problem has been identified, when all the flows and stories are made and all the wireframes, all they're tested. After they're tested, after everything is validated, then you want to worry about the visuals, because if you start doing the visuals early on, things might change based on your test. And so to save time, you want to wait till everything has been validated, and then you can start worrying about how it will look like and how it will tie closely with the brand. And so like what a user UI designer usually does is just like considering the look and feel of the product. They, again, it's like really similar to the UX designer, where they have to do a lot of analysis looking at the customers, the market, but they also have to have knowledge in branding and graphic design, kind of more visual principles, and just have some user guidelines and storylines. So just more visual knowledge and branding knowledge is really, really important. Like branding, the feel, visual, the look of it, as well as just balance the look and feel using branding and graphic design. And also just making sure that sometimes as a UI designer, you can either just focus on the visuals, or you can be a UI engineer where you work with UX designers and engineers to build design systems. And these design systems are meaning just little components of a page and how they would translate the code to make it scalable. So you look at a lot of like interactiveness, animation, working with developers to implement that as well, the little buttons, and how this code on this button would look like, and how this code on this card element on the website would look like is what you do. So you can focus on like two different fields. And so let's just look at last slide before I take it onto Figma. But a little bit of my design journey is that I started my life, or I guess like growing up, I wanted to be an anime artist. I never imagined myself working in STEM. Like I just thought math and science were really boring. To be honest, I love drawing and playing games. So I drew a lot of manga and drew and also play. And I dreamed of being a manga artist or a game designer. And I also ran cross country and track, and I was really into sports and had a huge social media and blog for that as well, called I Run Grace Face. It was super fun. And then I came into college. I studied bioengineering and pre-med. One thing partially because I was interested in learning how to biohack myself to run faster. I want to learn about the ins and outs of the human body. So like to biohack myself, just the sole purpose of running faster, my goal was to become a neurosurgeon with an MD PhD. And another part why I want to do bioengineering is because both my parents have PhDs. So all my life, they're like, you're going to be a doctor too, right? So that's why I was like, okay, I'm gonna be an MD PhD, just because I feel like I just have to, just because my parents told me to, and they said I had to since I was 4. So I was like, okay, I just had to. And I learned the hard way that I should not be doing things just for my resume or just to please my parents. I was drawn to bioengineering at first because I love the story cells tell, but after working in the lab, I realized I didn't like it at all, and that is totally okay. Even though what I was doing looked really great on my resume, I hated every moment of it, to be honest. And that is totally okay as well. And yeah, so my professor like let me quit, and I was really happy, really relieved. And then at the same time, this virtual reality lab opened up at my school, and I started like hanging out in there, meeting people who were interested in VR, watching YouTube tutorials to learn how to make games. And I've learned that I'm not limited to my major. I can learn anything from the internet as long as I have resources in the community to support and to ask questions. And that's how I kind of pivoted away from bioengineering. And I went into VR, and last summer I interned at Intuitive Surgical as a VR robotic surgery and game developer intern. So I made games, train surgeons, do surgery, kind of combining everything. At the same time, I started my own art business, Candid Leaf Designs, where I table at anime conventions because I never really let go of that childhood interest of mine of anime and drawing, because I've always just like liked it. It just makes me happy. So I just continued doing that as well. Just found a way to like root that in my life. And then after this is like when I graduated college, I graduated from undergrad this time, June 2019. So I kind of graduated undergrad knowing that I graduated a bioengineering degree and a computer science engineering minor, because I didn't change my major because I was on scholarship, so it would cost a lot of money, and that's literally the only reason why. But I knew I wanted to work in tech, not medical devices or medicine. And so I felt really unqualified, and I honestly had no idea what I want to do in tech. So I continued with my master's in computer science and engineering, just because both of my parents have PhDs. They made me feel like I had to at least have a master's. So grad school was never a choice. Like, no, grad school was, I feel like it was never a choice for me. So that's why I went straight to grad school after I graduated undergrad, studying computer science engineering. But later, after taking more programming classes, I found this class called Students Who Design on the Internet. Learned design for the first time, like product design, UI, UX design, and I like enjoyed it much more than I did in my programming classes. So I decided to pivot to that as well. At the same time, I started Design Buddies this April. Well, because design isn't, I kind of tapped into like 4 different needs here. So design it's like a really growing field right now. A lot of people are interested in design. A lot of people are doing career pivots into design. These boot camps are making a lot of money. And also during the pandemic, people want to stay connected. At the same time, I had a lot of professors telling me to stay in my lane, how I'm doing everything wrong, how I should stay with bioengineering. And also I had other designers telling me how I'm not taking my design career seriously because I was studying computer science. And so combining all that, I started Design Buddies because I just want to create an inclusive place for anybody interested in design to feel comfortable, not judged, and just ask questions and make friends. So since April this year, we have almost 10,000 members now. So right now, I'm running Design Buddies and also interning at EA while finishing up my last year of school. Technically still in school, moving through my degree and everything. So yeah, so that's where I'm at with my design journey. And so that, yeah, feel free to connect with me on any of my social media platforms. That concludes like a presentation portion, and I can take you guys through a tour in Figma now. And yeah, feel free to let me know if you have any questions as well along the way. I'll be answering them in the chat. Otherwise, let's see. Oh, we have like 15 minutes left. I can take a quick tour through Figma to see, just kind of walk through what a UX designer like works on. So let me share my Figma screen. Figma, where are you? I had it open just now. So, oh, there it is. Yeah, so this is Figma. So I have 4 different projects open. So Figma is a tool to prototype and just like make your designs. You can really do anything in Figma. For example, I even made my resume in Figma. It's like, it can replace a lot of the graphic tools. It can make really anything. And what I love about Figma, like even if you're making a resume, you can like comment on it. So it's like really collaborative. I can get feedback from people. And so this is Figma. And Figma, you can make websites. You can also make apps. This is one of the first apps I designed early this year at a hackathon. And then you can prototype designs to make them come to life. This is kind of like my second project I've done in Figma. And so, yeah, I can like prototype things. You can like make screens. So these all like have different elements to it. And then you can play it. So you can like, this is like a prototype where you use a test on people. And so you can just like, it's like a fake version of the real app that you can use and just like gather and just like test on users to like, it looks real. So you can gather real feedback from that as well. And yeah, so this is just like a prototype. What another thing you can do in Figma. And in Figma, there's like a lot of things in the beginning. You can, there's like different pages you can do to organize your content of a single file. And there's also design. You can like at each element, you can toggle the different tools, different features you can have. You can prototype, meaning you link things together to make them interactive, and each thing can have different interaction details. You can add animations and everything as well. You can even look at the code in Figma, the CSS, iOS, and this is just the interface with developers and how things would look like. And so that's why as a developer, it's also important. Well, it's also really helpful to know Figma. And then, yeah, so this is overview of Figma. You can make your resume. this is one of the freelance work I did for a client called Virtually. They're an online school. Yeah, so I designed all these websites, and in real life, you make a lot of iterations. I leave a lot of comments along the way. So yeah, this is like a startup I worked with as a freelancer that actually got into YC, which is pretty cool. One of my first clients actually, that people like my friend just introduced me and stuff. And yeah, so the workflow is just a bunch of iterations, a bunch of feedback, a bunch of meetings, and a bunch of different states as well, and looking at different card placements. Looking at different views, all these little touch points, all these different use cases and different iterations of the cards, and getting feedback along the way, leaving a lot of comments, and post feedback, explorations, getting more feedback, and just keep exploring, getting feedback. And I even designed the logo with Figma. I don't even have to use Illustrator anymore. Designed more iterations of the front page. Designing even more screens, and just the life of a UX designer. Design pricing screens. So, and yeah, and this is another example of Design Buddies. Our website, actually, we're getting a new website revamp. That our whole team is working on. You can like design websites in Figma as well. So all these things you could do. And yeah, you can even design your resume. So you can even design presentations, which I actually have done in Figma, design presentations. So you can really design anything. Figma is really an all-in-one tool. You don't even have to be a designer to use it. It's like super useful when you make something super quickly, because there's like so much like freedom to do. Like Google Slides can be pretty restricting sometimes after using Figma. So Figma is a great way to like go all out, can really make anything. And it's pretty easy to use. There's like, you can make a new frame, which is like an artboard. And frame, you can have different screen sizes. You can make social media posts. You can make shapes. You can make vector tools, like replace Illustrator. You can put text, add comments, move around. And yeah, so that's Figma in a nutshell. And feel free to let me know if you have any questions. I know we have like 13 minutes left. So yeah, yeah, so that concludes Figma. I'll open the comments.
Like Grace said, if you have any questions, you can leave them in the chat. If not, I also have, I guess I can, like deriving from your awesome presentation, honestly, it opened my eyes to UI UX. I've only ever heard of UI UX being like talked about in like Project Snapshot. We have a UI UX team, but yeah, if our audience does not have any questions, I have some questions for you. And I guess we only have 10 minutes. So real quick, I guess I did not realize that design was such a human-centered process, and it was actually designed, like design is designed to solve solutions. Like how has that personally affected you in terms of, I guess, because you mentioned a lot about balance of like personal, aesthetics. I'm pretty sure like every artist has that kind of like, has like a visual of like what they want to implement. But then balancing that in terms of, I guess, your personal aesthetics, your company values, like what your company wants to get out of, like obviously you want to make something attractive in order to attract like the users and like have them use your program as opposed to another one. So that, and also just like how would you go about balancing all of that, of the balance factors that you mentioned before too?
Yeah, definitely a lot of balancing. And I just like to just kind of so I guess an example is I have my own personal style I like to do. I also work at EA. So EA has their own like branding guidelines, different business goals as well. So as a designer, I'm always like putting myself in like other people's shoes and just like seeing how everything works and just getting a deep understanding of the actual problem trying to solve and like who the users are, what pain points they do, while also trying to like integrate the business side of things. So definitely it's like a huge balancing act. So I would do this just by like getting feedback from people, like collaborating, working with product managers, working with engineering, working with brand designers to kind of get everybody's feedback and making sure that we're meeting often to making sure that the product is going the right direction. So kind of like at balance, like when balancing, it's like you have to have so much knowledge of like how other users do it, and just like making sure that everything is well communicated, so you're moving the product towards the correct direction, just by like collaboration. I know it's a pretty tough role, not tough role, but just like for me, I used to be I used to want go into art, which is totally different than design. Art just like drawing whatever I want to do. In design, you're like making things for other people while like using these principles from art. Um, so yeah, it's just like a lot more human centered. So a lot more just like collaborating with people and getting feedback is how you want to like validate your balance, if that makes sense. So a combination of just getting feedback and making sure that you're getting feedback from business people, like even the company people, getting feedback from users, getting feedback from other stakeholders, and also just like working with stakeholders at all points of the design process to making sure that everything you have on paper, everything you have made just touches all these principles. And as designer, as just one person, it's good to have a little bit of knowledge of everything, so you can communicate and understand where these people are coming from. Yeah, so the balancing act of just like knowing things, getting feedback from things, and collaborating with people.
All right, thank you. That was such a complete answer. We do have another question. I guess, what kind of
Mhm.
work, of design work do you do at EA? And I want to extend that a little bit in terms of like, so what kind of work and how has your experience at EA, I guess, because from my perspective, I guess design is such an intuitive, it sounds like such an intuitive process. It's like, okay, whatever you feel like is aesthetic, right? How, like, what sources, what kind of resources do you consult? And how has your work experience, if you can describe that for us, at EA,
Mhm.
helped you in that aspect?
Yeah, sure. So at EA, I'm a UX design intern, and at EA, there's like different it's a huge company, so there's like a lot of different places you can design. There's like the game studio side where you make games, there's the marketing side where you make marketing design, there's also like the technology side, so which is like information technology and player and employee experience, basically designing everything besides games and marketing. So that's where I work in. So the projects I worked on at EA are kind of, they're somewhere under NDA, but the ones I could talk about are redesigning the EA help homepage and some marketing design for internal events, and also some internal tools for employees and some service design. Service design means just like designing how a layout of an office would look like after the pandemic. So I've been involved like a lot of different things. My team is called Experience Design, and we're a team of like 13, mostly UX designers, some UX researchers, and some front-end developers. So we work on like 50 different products because I think we're like one of the only design teams at one of our whole organizations. So our team works on like 50 different products. So that's what I do at EA. I'm also an intern, but I feel like my team has given me like a lot of responsibilities, like do a lot of things as well. So it's just pretty cool because I got to experience a lot of UX design, brand design, visual design, surface design, user research. So I got a lot of these experiences at EA just because my team is super interdisciplinary. They work on a lot of different things. And wait, what was the second part of the question?
Just like, since art is such an intuitive kind of like process, and the results can be, it depends on like what the user experience tells you about your like designs. What kind of sources do you consult? Like, I think you briefly mentioned like psychology, and just like in terms of, um, gauging what could work, right? And I know
Mhm.
that's like an experiential and experimental process. Can you go into that a little bit more before our session ends? Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, usually I just like to look within the product, and every product is super, super different. So it's good to like kind of know like the underlying principles of just like art, kind of like contrast and hierarchy and shape and form. So all these things kind of like are the fundamentals and theories, but that's also pretty important to know, but it's also like every product is super different. So it's important to do research and consult the users itself and all the stakeholders and the market research, what's out there. So yeah, really, I guess like the most important thing is like know the fundamentals of design thinking, these like 5 steps you typically do, and also like being able to, and also like little theories, just like not, you don't have to like recite theories back and like memorize it, but just like have an understanding, like, oh, like I should have like heading 1 or like a body text, and just like little things like that, making sure everything's spaced out it usually comes with practice and getting feedback, and also like, doing research on the product itself. Like both what I'm doing at EA right now, for example, is I'm I can't say too much without NDA, so I'm give a really high level overview. But I'm working on a project, and so it has to do with a lot of stakeholders with that involves the entire company. So what I'm doing right now is doing user research interviews. So I'm talking one-on-one with a lot of different people across all offices of EA, and just finding out what they like, what they dislike, what they find helpful. But I'm also sitting in a lot of meetings with other people to do market research and seeing what existing tools out there and like different vendors and everything too. And so yeah, so just like combining like the problem, like doing the user research and market research, and also just having an understanding of, I guess like in design, it's kind of like a little bit of common sense and just like thinking um common sense in design like developed over time, because I definitely wasn't born with like, oh, I shouldn't have like yellow on white or something like that. But just like these things developed over time. So in a nutshell, it's also a balancing act of just being able to communicate and collaborate with all these types of people, and just like validating everything with data. So my user research, like when entering people, I asked them some things like, oh, how would you rate this feature from 1 to 10? And just like if it's like 10, that means it's pretty important. So that means if like majority, like over 75% of users say it's 10, then that means like we should convince leadership to give more efforts to engineering to implement this as well, to like invest in this product. So yeah, I guess like to sum it up, it's just like a balancing act. It's like interviewing users and collecting data, both qualitative and quantitative data. So qualitative being pulling quotes, and quantitative data meaning like how important it is, and also like knowing what other solutions exist out there, and being able to use those to convince like leadership in a company to see like, oh, this is actually a real problem we should be investing into. And after you kind of narrow down the problem, you want to be able to like implement it and like prototype it using these like underlying design theory principles you would use. Yeah, so yeah, that's like a lot of things going on, but essentially it comes down to being able to understand all parts of the problem and being able to narrow down and use these principles, like these design thinking theories, to drive a solution to those problems that you've gathered from all these people.
Thank you so much. That was a very thorough answer, and I think it ties very much into your central theme of like, even though you cover so many aspects, which is a great rundown of like UI UX balance. I think it's a lot of balance, and I think like when we do post this video, there will be so many people who will be benefiting from it. Thank you so much. Like honestly, I learned so much personally, and I'm pretty sure
Yeah,
our
you're
audience
welcome.
have also as well. Is there anything you would like to plug last minute, or like I don't know, send a link or any of that?
Yeah, sure. I can send my yeah, sure. I can quickly plug Design Buddies. If you guys are interested to learn more about design, we have Design Buddies. Um, and yeah, we have Design Buddies. I have my LinkedIn. That I have. I use like all the social media platforms. But I just like plug my LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, I think we'll also include that in our email when we do recap this webinar, like next week. So yeah, thank
Mhm.
you once
Yeah,
again. And all right, I think if we don't have any last questions, I guess I'll follow up with an email and just thank you. Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me on.
All right, thank you everyone for participating. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us at Project Snapshot or connect with Grace on LinkedIn. Yes, great value in just her work.
Thank
All right, thank
you.
you everyone. Have a great day.
Thank
Have a great
you.
rest of your day.
You as well.